Before we begin our festivities this morning. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible. Privileges of freedom with those who want to serve in the true spirit of servant leadership. We thank you, Lord, for the blessings of liberty, for the freedoms that we so easily can take for granted. And we thank you for the process by which we can select our leaders. Thank you, Lord, for blessing this conference for these 29 years. Thank you for its leadership. Thank you for those in this hotel who provide the food for us and serve it with such good cheer. Now, Lord, please bless our ongoing discussions and the candidates who come before us. In Christ's name, amen. Thank you. Great. So we have a minor shift in the order of things. We are going to begin with two lieutenant governor candidates, followed by John Gizzi, followed by the next two lieutenant governor candidates. So with that in mind, our first speaker this morning is going to be Jeff Bartos. I've had the great pleasure of getting to know Jeff over the last year or so, and I think he's exactly the kind of leader that the Commonwealth needs. He's a proven business and community leader. He was born and raised in Berks County. He joined the Scott Wagner for Governor team as the lieutenant governor candidate back in November. And in an era when the opioid crisis is devastating Pennsylvania families and families sustaining jobs remain in short supply, Scott and Jeff together are focused on restoring hope and opportunity for all Pennsylvanians. So at town halls and meetings across the Commonwealth, Scott and Jeff are promoting economic policies that will make the staples of a middle-class life, home ownership, healthcare, and education more affordable, and I might add, better. They're also fighting for every child in Pennsylvania to have the opportunity to attend an outstanding school of their choice. Please join with me in welcoming Jeff Bartos, candidate for lieutenant governor.
Good morning. You know, if this was a liberal conference instead of a conservative conference, we'd have to start it at 10 a.m. This group has been up. Many of you have been to the gym. You may have been to church already. You said your prayers. Probably got some work done. It's good to be amongst good conservatives. So thank you for making your time on a Saturday morning to be with me. Colin, Lohman, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. And before I begin my remarks, I just want to share with this crowd what you've heard already from so many speakers, which is there's a deep loss at this year's conference. We miss Mr. Anton very much. I was just sharing with Lohman before the breakfast some of the text messages I have from Fred during my time over the last year where we had breakfast and he talked to me about my campaign and gave me advice. And I will forever save those text messages and cherish them. And so we miss Mr. Anton, but we carry on his legacy in this outstanding conference. So very briefly, a little bit about me. Proud husband of Cheryl for over 20 years. Proud father of Emily and Sarah. Emily will be a college student next year at Franklin and Marshall. So for any of you with children and grandchildren in college, you know that our students are under attack. Anyone with a conservative belief on campus is fair game. And so when you say your prayers, say prayers for our college students who are trying to live their conservative values in an era where they're frankly just not accepted at many, many places. Born and raised in Reading, Cheryl and I have been raising our family in Montgomery County for a little over 20 years with a brief stop in Scranton. I'm a graduate of Emory University and the University of Virginia School of Law, and right after law school moved back to the Commonwealth, but a lifelong resident of Pennsylvania. My involvement in politics is like so many of yours. I was not a candidate up until a year ago, and I got involved as a candidate. Most of what I had done all the years was raise money for good conservative candidates across the country and certainly throughout the Commonwealth. And about 2.5 years ago, when Bob Casey supported the Iran nuclear deal, that betrayal of our safety and security, both for our allies in the Middle East, including, of course, our greatest ally in the Middle East, the State of Israel, and all of our safety and security at home, I looked at that betrayal and I said, all this money has been raised from the pro-Israel community for Senator Casey over the years. He turned his back at the critical moment. Someone's got to stand up and do something about that. And so if you will, I stepped out of my chair and away from the table and put my name out there as a candidate. And here we are a year later. It's been an outstanding experience traveling throughout the Commonwealth. And as Colin mentioned, in November, I was privileged, for the first time in Pennsylvania history, a gubernatorial candidate put together a team. And Scott Wagner asked me to join his team sometime over the summer. And any of you know Scott? Scott thinks outside the box. He challenges the status quo. Yeah, that's worth a... And when Scott first asked me, do you want to be my lieutenant governor candidate? I think you'd be outstanding in that role. I said, Scott, what the heck does the lieutenant governor even do? And he smiled and he said, I know what you're thinking, and you're a business guy and you've been successful. I have a different vision for what that job can do, and I really want you on my team. We need to hit the ground running if we're going to beat the most liberal governor in America, Tom Wolf. I need you on my team because we need to campaign together. We need to win this primary together. We need to win the general election together, and then we need to govern together from the day the transition starts. And again, any of you know Scott. Scott is a man of incredible vision, incredible energy, deep heart for other people, a willingness and an eagerness to roll up his sleeves and get the job done. And it has truly been the privilege and honor of my career to join Scott in this quest. And we're well on our way to a victory in 5 weeks. So very briefly in my last minute here, gosh, the time goes quickly. We're at a crossroads in this Commonwealth, and everybody in the room knows this. We are at the crossroads, and in one direction is Illinois and Connecticut, and basically a failure. And in the other direction is Wisconsin, and what Governor Walker has done in Wisconsin and what Governor Daniels did at Indiana. And I'm telling you, with everything I've seen over the last year, and you know this in your hearts, Scott Wagner is the only leader that can take Pennsylvania in the direction it needs to go and has the courage to enact the reforms that have worked so brilliantly in places like Indiana and Wisconsin. And if we don't act now, our children and grandchildren will not want to live in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So now is the moment. Look forward to your support for Senator Wagner and myself on May 15th. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Jeff set a great example. We are on a tight time schedule this morning. And for the purposes of all the other speakers, I want them to know that there is a time clock that shows on the back wall. And my job up here is to be the enforcer of that time clock. So Jeff was absolutely perfectly on time, and I'm sure that he sets the standard that everyone else will follow. Our next speaker is a new face on the political scene in Pennsylvania, at least on the statewide scene. Kathy Coder has had 20 years experience in leadership training. Think about that. Isn't that useful in our world? She holds degrees in communications and business from Edinburgh University. She has a master's in organizational leadership from Geneva. She has worked with a broad range of clients developing their leadership teams. Some of them include Walmart, Chick-fil-A, Duquesne Light, UPMC, and Home Depot. And for the last 8 years, Kathy dipped her toe into politics by serving as on Bellevue's city council, and then she rose and became president of that council for 4 years. In 2012, she ran for the state house in the 16th district. She's currently secretary for the Republican Party of Allegheny County, and she's a member of Republican State Committee. She's also on the faculty for the Ann Anstein Women's Leadership Program. Please welcome Kathy Coder.
Well, good morning, everybody. I just want to thank Loman for bringing back the bacon. And my dad was a butcher, so I always say it's our 5th food group in our house. I would love to talk about my family and my husband sitting over here. And he played in the NFL, and he was an offensive lineman. And I always say that he opens holes for me and protects me. So wherever I am, you'll probably see this big guy over here. But I want to get down to business and talk a little bit about why I stepped into this role. And I think you alluded to that. And it is the whole idea of what I've been doing for the last 18 years, and that is leadership development. I go into companies, some that are good, some that are not so good, and they bring me in because they want to move from good to great or great to greater. And I base my whole company's name on a thing called Integrate, and it's on a book called Good to Great. And I'd like to share with you what I would like to do as Lieutenant Governor. I see the dysfunction in Harrisburg, and I think you would all say that's true, and we need to do something about that. My background, like I said, is 18 years of leadership development training, but I also, for the last 8 years, have been in local government, so I think I understand government as well. So let me talk about two things today that I would like to see. First of all, alignment. And Byron touched on this last night. We need to get the right people on the bus in the right seats. First of all, we need to remove Tom Wolf and get some other people in there who understand that leadership starts at the top and leadership creates culture. That's why we have such a mess. So I did not partner with anyone. As you see, I'm an independent here. I did not partner up with someone. I know Jeff talked about visionary, but I want to make sure that if I win, that I can work with any of the gubernatorial candidates that would win that seat. I want to be in alignment. The second thing with alignment, I think what Byron talked about last night, once we're in as lieutenant governor and governor, we need to surround ourselves with the right people and put them in the right spots. So I think that that's key. Then we need to get a clear mission and vision. I have never heard of a clear mission and vision with the current administration. And then we need a plan on how we're going to get there. And that's what we do when we go into organizations. That's where we start, and we spend money accordingly. We set goals and we spend money accordingly. And I hope to have a balanced budget and deliver the budget on time. And I think that's part of the accountability of this role. And the next thing I want to talk about is accountability. How many of you know that we are the highest paid lieutenant governor? We have the highest paid lieutenant governor in the country. Does anybody know that? We do. And here's what Governor Rendell said. It's the highest paid position to be irrelevant in Pennsylvania government. And here's what I want to tell you. Either we're going to make it relevant or we need to get rid of it. And what I would like to do is make it relevant. And I would like to have goals. I would like to be transparent with those goals and work together with the governor that this role would be relevant. The other thing with accountability, as you've been seeing in the news, that it's a disgrace what's going on between the governor and the lieutenant governor, there is a lieutenant governor's mansion. Does everybody know that one? We are the only state that has housing for the lieutenant governor. And that's another thing I think we need to take a look at. Does that make sense? Should we sell it? We are not there as an aristocracy to be served. We are there to serve. The other thing that many people do not know, taxpayer dollars, $350,000 to $400,000 of your dollars are going to staff the lieutenant governor's mansion. So here's what my plan is. We're going to get rid of all of that, and my husband's going to be mowing the grass at the lieutenant governor's mansion. The last thing, too, I want all of you to think about this. There's very few job descriptions for this role, but one is that you preside over the Senate and that you break a tie if there's a tie in the Senate. With the landscape right now, it's very volatile, and we don't know what that Senate's going to look like. So make sure when you're looking for this particular position that you get a conservative in there, because they could be breaking ties in the Senate. And lastly, I just want you to think about this. We need a new face in there. We need new voices in there. That's the only way we're going to beat Tom Wolf. And I believe Harrisburg needs a leadership makeover, and I'm the person that can help do that. So please vote for me on May 15th. I would appreciate that, and I think the people of Pennsylvania would too.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I must say I have a nice mental picture of a linebacker on the lawn. We're going to interrupt our cavalcade of candidates now for a few moments for one of the central features of Saturday at PLC, and that is an address by John Gizzi, a man whom I've been privileged to call a friend for 20-some years. John Gizzi is an absolutely remarkable institution in his own right. He is the dean of the White House Press Corps. Many of us remember the many years that he wrote for Human Events magazine. What a shame it was when that fine publication went down. He then stayed in Washington. You'll always find him at the front of the rows when you see the photographs, the video feed of the presidential briefings. He knows everyone in Washington, and he has a memory which is absolutely like an encyclopedia. He can tell you every state race that you can mention, but it doesn't stop there. If you were to ask John Gizzi, who ran for president of Peru in 1964, I'll bet you John Gizzi could tell you. In fact, he's scratching his head right now and nodding. I think he's got the answer. He is exceptionally well connected, and he has had a heart for Pennsylvania and for this conference for years. He has attended, I think, virtually every PLC since it started, and he is in a position to both know us and have a truly national perspective from which he looks at our politics. So John is the central feature, other than the candidates, of Saturday morning. I love him like a friend and a brother. You will too if you haven't heard him before. Please join me in welcoming the inimitable, the indomitable John Gizzi. Newsmax Now. I should mention Newsmax Now.
The preceding was a paid political announcement. And the answer to your question, unpaid, the answer to your question, Colin, was Federico Belaunde Terry, elected president in 1964. But by way of disclosure, I wasn't following Peruvian politics back in 1964. That was provided to me through the magic of Google by Scott Wagner. I will say I started following Peruvian politics in 1990, and that was when Mario Vargas Llosa, the novelist, was defeated for president by Alberto Fujimori. And as it is in covering so many states, so many countries, one finds that the children of people I read about and reported on are emerging in politics. Former President Fujimori has 2 children in the Congress of Peru. So it's not just limited to Casey's here or Greens in Philadelphia. The dynastic order goes on everywhere, even in Peru. It is a pleasure to be with you here this morning. And Colin, as usual, is right on. I was at the first PLC in 1989. It was almost a different world then. Think about it. There were no iPhones. There was no Google. There was no Facebook or Twitter. Invitations to speakers and panelists were done through snail mail and the telephone. And in those days, PLC in its embryonic stages was not exactly a hot item for speakers. I remember the organizers were thrilled to have the newly elected House Republican whip, who happened to be born in the Pittsburgh area, Newt Gingrich. He was our dinner speaker, and I was a panelist. And remember, this is before the cable television shows reached their present status. It was before the White House briefings were publicized. So you might say I was a bit obscure in those days. In fact, Sue Staub, who was our panel's chairman, said she didn't have any information to introduce me, so I'd have to introduce myself. And I did. I said, "My name is John Gizzi. There'll be a short pause for you to say, 'Who cares?'" Well, obviously that is changed. And judging by seeing this crowd so large, so eager, and so early, many of you do care. And I'm just moved beyond words for that. I have to say that PLC has come a long way. You're not just part of the scenery, you are a force, a political force, indeed a force of nature. I can't put it any other way. Let me just give you an example. In 1990, my friend Peg Luksick carried the conservative banner. A very lonely Peg Luksick carried a conservative banner in the race for governor. All of the smart money was on Barbara Hafer, who was Rhino before the term was ever coined. That's changed. There's 3 candidates for governor, all of whom proclaim themselves good as Goldwater conservatives and do their utmost to demonstrate their conservative bona fides to PLC. That would not happen were it not for this group or the people in the room. So while I was present at the creation, it is most enjoyable to see an organization that not only lived through modern Pennsylvania history, but made it. I have to say that as I speak of that, and I look back at that period, it's bittersweet for me. I'm looking at the table right over on the right, 2 tables over from the front, and I see an empty chair there. That's where Fred Anton used to sit. All I have, I would give without hesitation, just to have him in that seat one more time, to have one more conversation with him, to hear that gravelly voice and to see those big gesturing hands and to see his bald head and his bright eyes just encouraging me as I spoke. I'm here because of Fred Anton, and PLC is here. As one of the speakers mentioned last night, we went through a period where there was no PLC, and we thought it wouldn't come back. Fred was a pivotal force in bringing it back. And I think that whatever success we have in 2018 will be a monument that Fred Anton did not live or die in vain. Now, if Fred were here right now and I can just hear his voice, he would say, Gizzi, stop with all the sentimental stuff and talk politics, okay? Well, let's talk a little politics right now. We have some critical elections across the country for the House and Senate, and they're going to be very critical for the president's agenda. Let's look at where they stand right now. 38 Republicans, 38 Republican members of the House of Representatives are either retiring, resigning, or seeking another office. That is a high for Republicans heading for the exit sign, a high since World War II. Democrats, number 18, who say, I want out, the most recent being in my home state of Connecticut, Congresswoman Elizabeth Esty. And guess what? In the nutmeg state, which has not sent a Republican to Congress in a decade, Republicans have a better than even chance of picking up that seat. Now, when you look this way, we see so much that points to a Democratic recapture of the House. 2 Republican House members leaving in California, and their seats likely to flip to the Democratic side. The same is true for New Jersey. And here in Pennsylvania, well, I think we have the obvious proof that PLC was right in continuing to carry an issue through many years of conferences, the issue of judicial reform and judicial restraint. Now, I am not sure what the results will be. You might not know this, but Republicans now have the most seats that they have had since 1946. They're bound to lose some, and in a midterm election, the president's party always suffers a bit. The point is to just keep Democrats from getting to the magic 24 that will make Nancy Pelosi Speaker once again. I think just saying that message might do the trick for us. On the Senate side, I would worry less, but I'd always be worried in politics. 34 seats are up for election this fall. 24 are held by Democrats, 10 by Republicans, the most recent being, of course, the appointment of a new senator in Mississippi and the need for a special election. I would just say, based on simple mathematics, one looks at the defense that Democrats must play and look at the seats that could very much fall into Republican hands. Pennsylvania, Michigan, the state of Indiana, Missouri, where Claire McCaskill is finally going to get an opponent who won't trip and fall before the election, North Dakota, Montana. In the meantime, the only Republican who seems to be close is Ted Cruz in Texas. And guess what? If Ted Cruz is the only one who's a little close in the polls, Republicans look pretty good at playing defense themselves. So my betting now is the Senate will stay Republican and perhaps be a little bit more Republican after this. But the House is going to be a toss-up. It's really going to depend on people like you who get out the vote and do things. We're warned about the threats against us on the other side, and these warnings carry merit. The Me Too movement that we read about so much, the recent March for Our Lives in which young people champion gun control, and probably the most fearsome statistic of all, and one that we should be concerned about and look at. In Alabama, during a recent special election for the U.S. Senate that the whole country watched, the turnout among women who happened to be Black was higher for Democratic candidate and victor Doug Jones than it was for Barack Obama when he was elected president in 2008. Now think about this for a moment. As Michael Steele, the former Republican national chairman and himself a Black man, put it, there was a greater turnout for a Democratic Senate hopeful than there was to make history by electing the first Black president. And these are all things we should be concerned about. There are those who say these are passing fads. The Me Too movement will go away, as will the March for Our Lives. And the nervousness about it is just spread by the nattering nabobs of negativism. Well, I can tell you, as someone who covered races firsthand, most recently out in Western Pennsylvania, where Rick Saccone lost a race he should have won, we have a fight on our hands, and the conservative movement is going to have to be involved in the 2018 election as never before. But in saying this, let me warn you all that the greatest enemy we face is not the Me Too movement, not the marchers for greater gun control, but ourselves and the apathy that sometimes develop. You know what I mean. Something looks hopeless, or we don't like one particular thing that the president has done. Well, then we get discouraged and we go down. This never happens with PLC. I can tell you, when I look out at the group here, it reminds me of the story about the lion in the jungle. And he went up and he went to a deer and said, "Who's the king of the jungle?" And the deer said, "You are, lion." And then he saw a monkey up in the tree and said, "Who's the king of the jungle?" And the monkey said, "You are, lion." And then he went up to an elephant that was asleep by a pond. And he said, "Who's the king of the jungle?" The elephant just snored. He said, "Who's the king of the jungle?" And the elephant snored again. And then the lion reached out with his paw, shoved the elephant, and said, "Who's the king of the jungle?" The elephant woke up with a start, grabbed the lion with his trunk, threw him against a tree, stomped on him, kicked him into the pond. Bruised, bleeding, the lion crawled out of the pond, looked at the elephant, and said, "Well, just because you don't know the right answer, you don't have to get so damn mad." That is the attitude we have to have when we hear about the negativism about the coming campaign. And I know what's bad if we are not like that lion and we do give up and we don't show up at the polls. I've covered it over the years. 1974 was the Watergate year. Democrats made their greatest gains of the 20th century because Republicans were so disgusted with their leaders, they stayed home. 1998, the year Colin remembers very well. Republicans in Congress, including our friend Newt Gingrich, were so quick to adjourn and campaign, they let Bill Clinton and the Democrats get everything they want in the budget. And the proverbial grassroots at home, us guys, got disgusted and stay home. Harry Reid should have been defeated and barely survived by 200 votes because our people weren't there in Nevada. And then in 2006, people were upset with and tired of George W. Bush. And what happened was Democrats took the House and the Senate, laying the groundwork for the passage of Obamacare 3 years later. I could go on and on with examples like this, but history would have been very different if only we had turned up and voted and put aside petty differences with some of our leaders. Instead, we had the bad circumstances. Cassius said to Brutus, the fault, dear Brutus, lies not in the stars, but in ourselves. And that's something we should always remember. If we don't show up, we are simply going to enter what Pope Francis calls the culture of indifference. But if we do show up and we resist the Democrats mocking us and belittling us, we'll win in the end. Mahatma Gandhi may have said it best. First they ignore us, then they laugh at us, then they fight us, and then we win. And that's what we will do ahead. I want to leave you with one story about someone who never gave up. It reminds me so much of PLC during the governorships of Casey and Rendell, and now with Wolf, keeping alive the ideas that fuel this conference and fuel conservatism in general. His name was Rudolf Cahorn. He was a Russian. He was a classical pianist, a prodigy. But he also had the misfortune in 1941 of being half German. And as a result, he was exiled by Stalin to South Kazakhstan. And he had a particular punishment. He was denied a piano or any sheet music in his place of exile. So what Cahorn did was take a board, and with a crayon, he drew a piano keyboard. And every morning he would get up. Debussy, Chopin, Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff would be alive in his mind, and he would hear this music, but no one else could hear it. He imagined it all as he moved his fingers across the keyboard that he had made. This he did every day for 13 years. And then in 1953, Stalin was dead. There was a new Russian leader, Nikita Khrushchev. Yes, he was a communist and a dictator, but he had no qualm with anyone because of their ancestry or because their mother happened to be German. Prisoners came back to Russia from exile, and Rudolf Cahorn was one of them. Within a week, he was scheduled to perform at a concert hall in St. Petersburg. He walked out wearing white tie and tails, sat at a grand piano, moved his fingers across a genuine keyboard. Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff, and yes, Tchaikovsky were heard again, this time by the pianist himself and his audience. And in the end, he received a standing ovation led by Khrushchev himself. My friends, this is something that we must do like Rudolf Cahorn. You've done it so many times. You've kept alive ideas from lowering tax rates to vouchers to offer alternatives in schools to judicial restraint. And they've proved triumphant in the end. Do so again. Do so with your votes and your activities this fall, because in the process, you'll do something extraordinary that people are going to hear about all across the country, and it'll be reported on by some pretty ordinary people, guys like me. Thank you very much. Oh. Thank you. Oh my gosh. You wouldn't care to talk me into an encore, would you?
John, thank you. Oh, what a treat he is. Now back to candidates. I am pleased to introduce our next candidate for Lieutenant Governor as someone whom I had the great pleasure of meeting, I think, back in 1994 when I was beginning my time in politics and agreed with this candidate to come before us today on the issue of outcome-based education, the deceptively named education reform that was going to upend much of Pennsylvania's public education. And the leadership was absolutely in the hands of Peg Luksick. She went on to become a candidate for governor. She has been involved in the education field for over 3 decades. She's been a real driving force in the conservative movement. She served as an advisor to President Reagan's Commission on the Family. She has taught, so she knows education from the inside as well as the outside at every level in both special and regular education. And she was a national leader in stopping the first deceptively named education reform, outcome-based education, and just as ardently in opposition to the next deceptively named education reform, which was nothing about education and all about power, called Common Core. Please welcome candidate for Lieutenant Governor, Peg Luksick.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining me this morning. For those who don't know me, the most important thing about me is that I have been married for about 39 years, and my husband and I are the proud parents of 6 children. They are all girls, except for 5 of them. It's an IQ joke. How'd you do? I want to thank John, a dear friend. I wasn't that alone in 1990. In that race, I did run for governor in the Republican primary. I spent $45,000 in a statewide governor's race. I got 46% of the vote, so I wasn't that alone. I did work for President Reagan, which was such a privilege. I was also a founder of this organization. I sat on the founding board of the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, and I was a founder of the Pennsylvania Family Institute. I was also the strategist behind the passage of Pennsylvania's Homeschool Act. So anyone who homeschools their children in Pennsylvania, you're welcome. But I don't really want to talk about me. A couple of weeks ago, I was addressing a group of high school students, and they asked me quite seriously, Dr. Luksick, is there such a thing as an American culture? And I thought that was one of the saddest questions I've ever heard. And they were serious. Well, of course there is. And it begins with the premise that you, each of you, are created beings. And because you are created, you have rights. Not because you belong to this group or that group, but because you're created. And the most fundamental of those rights is your right to life. Because if a government can tell any of us that we don't have the right to exist, they can tell all of us that we don't have the right to exist. You have a right to liberty, and that begins with the right to self-defense from aggression, no matter where that aggression comes from. The Pennsylvania Constitution says it best. It says that your right to bear arms shall not be questioned. Your right to liberty also means that we are a republic, which means we are a nation of laws. Illegal immigration is, by definition, illegal. If we are not a government of laws, we are a government of whims, and that's a tyranny. That's why we need to stand against illegal immigration. It undermines the very fabric of who we are as a republic. You have a right to pursue your dreams, and that begins with education. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you our schools are not workforce development centers where little pieces of human capital get trained for a job that has been pre-selected for them by data mining. Our schools are supposed to be academic institutions where our precious children get the knowledge and the understanding of our heritage that they need to pursue their own dreams. Common Core has got to go. It means you have the right to the fruits of your labor. The property tax system is insane. It is the only system that says if you owe a bill of $4,000, we'll seize $53,000 worth of your property. Who thinks that's fair? Property tax is antiquated and outmoded. We need to find a better way to fund our schools and our counties, and we need to do it right now. It means we have the right to pray. If you are created, you have to have the right to speak to your creator. Isn't it sad that in so many of our public institutions, we not only allow, but sometimes encourage folks to kneel in disrespect for that flag and forbid or ridicule them for kneeling in respect for their creator? No wonder we have such problems. We need to do something about that. Now, interestingly, government has no rights. Government only has responsibilities. And the authority that we give them to honor the responsibilities we delegate to their tasks. That means it needs to be transparent. No secret funds, no secret taxes, money spent for what it's budgeted for and nothing else. It means we need to stand firmly. Now, I worked for President Reagan, and President Reagan used to say, freedom is not passed through in our bloodstream. We have to defend it. We have to teach it to the next generation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, defending it begins with proclaiming it without anger, without malice, but without compromise. And I've spent 3 decades doing that. The lieutenant governor is the second highest office in the land. And with all due respect, while the lieutenant governor works with the governor, the lieutenant doesn't work for the governor. And like every other elected official, the lieutenant governor works for you and should be chosen by you. I humbly ask for you to join me. My website is PA for PEG, and I hope you remember me on May 15th. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
I met our next candidate when I was county commissioner in Chester County, and she was newly elected as county commissioner in Washington County. The moment Diana Irie Vaughn stepped onto the stage, you could tell that she had that rare combination of talent, intellect, energy, and faith that will destine her to leadership positions at an ever higher level. She is truly a gifted public servant. She has served as Washington County Commissioner for several terms. 4, is it now? 6 terms, gracious. And she's also found time to be a wife and a mother and a champion of veterans. Those of us who are veterans really appreciate that. She's also been an advocate for the less fortunate. She's truly been a pillar of her community, and she really has a desire to serve others. She has a saying when she runs for office: don't vote for her because she is a woman. Vote for her because she has a track record of success. She's a leader of a new movement that has taken the language of the left and turned it on its head, which I love. I love any time you can use the other side's language against them, do it. And she has a hashtag called #resistance. She's taken this term resistance, which the left tries to make theirs, and has made it hers. Resistance to high taxes, resistance to top-heavy bureaucracies, to limited educational choices, resistance to electing public servants who won't work tirelessly to make Pennsylvania the best place it can be. Please join us in welcoming the latest member of the resistance movement and candidate for Lieutenant Governor, Diana Irie Vaughn.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for coming out at such an early time this morning to become more informed citizens. To the other candidates running for Lieutenant Governor, running for other offices, and to those who serve, I thank you for your willingness to make personal sacrifices on behalf of others. I am the wife of Colonel Robert Vaughn, who is in year 41 of military service as a reservist with over 7 mobilizations in just 14 years. I am the mother of 3, ages 24, 27, and 28. My heart for public service began a long time ago when I was in about the 5th grade. I went around our community collecting money to send flowers to a fellow community member who had passed. It's that same heart for service that has led me to serve as a Washington County Commissioner for the past 23 years. A focus I've had as Commissioner is to create a vibrant economy. That includes keeping taxes low, unifying an economic delivery system, and creating business location opportunities with ready-to-build sites. This plan has allowed Washington County to grow by over 8,000 new jobs. As Commissioner, I'm proud of a program I put together called Furlough into Service. We take our nonviolent offenders out of our correctional facility and put them to work in our community. This program, since inception in 1997, has provided over 225,000 hours of free labor to our local governments and our nonprofits. And I've led the charge for fiscal responsibility, especially in our pension fund. I've made sure we've always made the recommended contributions. I created a conservative policy statement, diversified asset allocation plan, which has allowed us to lower our risk, reduce our assumed rate of return to 6.75, while still enjoying a 90% funding ratio. For this and many other fiscal practices, Washington County has a AA bond rating by S&P. I have led the effort to hold human services accountable. I've created re-entry opportunities to reduce recidivism, and I've spearheaded efforts to address the opioid crisis. As a pro-life woman and a person of faith, I instituted the practice of prayer before our public meetings. As a woman who is grateful for the freedoms we enjoy because of those who have served, I instituted the practice of the Pledge of Allegiance at our meetings. In my 23 years of service in Washington County, I've led effortless with other community leaders to address the social and economic issues that we face every day. I believe that my 23 years of service as Commissioner uniquely qualifies me to step in and serve as your next Lieutenant Governor with a very seamless transition. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor to do my part to ensure that my family and every Pennsylvania family for generations to come can live, work, and raise their families with conservative family values, plentiful jobs, and a low crime rate, and with an opportunity to live a better life than my generation has. As I know from my years serving on the Board of Commissioners, it takes a team to effectively lead. We've seen what happens when leadership fails or hides with Governor Wolf and his team. I'm proud to run with Paul Mango because we have shared values and a vision for our Commonwealth. I'm proud to run with a man who has already demonstrated leadership and who has a vision to bring our jobs and our children back to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has an opportunity by electing Paul Mango to have a governor with a plan, to have a governor with a servant's heart, impeccable character, and unmatched competence. This is Pennsylvania's opportunity to restore the dream. The priorities of the Mango-Vaughn ticket include bringing our jobs and our children back, improving our educational system, allowing for choice, addressing the opioid crisis, putting an end to our dangerous sanctuary cities, and reining in our out-of-control healthcare costs. Together, Paul Mango and I possess the leadership and experience to cure the disease of despair that so many Pennsylvanians face today. And we will make our Keystone Commonwealth a state among nations. Today, I humbly ask you to join the Mango-Vaughn team to restore the dream of promise to Pennsylvania. I thank you for all you do in leadership. I ask God to bless you for your service and to bless this great Commonwealth.
Thanks, Diana. We are now going to have a panel discussion. So